My name's Noah Kairu. I'm a filmmaker, a martial artist, and a world explorer. Today I'm going to give you a talk about self-discovery through travel and adventure. Okay, as we all know, we live on an amazing planet, abundant in land and water, rich and diverse in animals and plants. Our home is perfect for sustaining life. Today, scientists and anthropologists say that we as a human species are around 200,000 years old, and that Africa is the birthplace of humanity. But how much of this collective story do we know? And is it important for us to be connected to our African roots? We have a supposed belief that we've gone from apes through the evolution to the greatness of modern man. But actually, when we look back through human history, we can see that many great civilizations have risen to greatness and fallen many times before the advent of our modern world. We can still also look around the world today and see lots of different cultures that still have different social structures. And we as humans have gone from nomads to hunter-gatherers to farmers to industrial societies to now the social systems that we see today. We've gone from living in harmony with nature to asserting our will and dominating our ways onto our planet. Today, the world has been organized into 195 countries, with the strong exploiting and using the resources of the weaker. There's now nearly 8 billion people on Earth, and it's been recorded that there's around 6,500 languages. And through the technology of our modern age, the world is more connected than ever. But what is our collective story? What is it that connects us? And what have we lost as we've gone from small communities to our globalized nations? Questions like these have been a driving force behind many of the adventures I've made around the world and in a lot of the films I've created. So you're probably asking yourself, who is this guy and why is he asking and saying these deep questions? Well, my personal story, it began in 1979. I was born to an English mother and a Jamaican father. It was still a time in the UK where interracial relationships were seen as taboo. And after a period of time and lack of understanding, my parents separated when I was about 4. And my mum and me went to live with her parents, my grandparents, in a small village in the English countryside. Growing up, I lived in mixed Jamaican and English environments, but I also lived in predominantly white environments. And as I got older, I lived in more multicultural environments. I lived in the city of London, but I also lived in villages and towns across the UK. One thing that was stable in my childhood was my ability to adapt and my love for the natural world. And by the time I was 18, I'd lived in 19 different places. So to say that my childhood was unstable was a little bit of an understatement. It was filled with a lot of love from my family, but in the wider society, I experienced a lot of racism, injustice, a broken education, and a few near-death experiences. Luckily, in my teens, I got into studying the art or the martial art of Muay Thai. And this really started to strengthen my will and develop my character. It taught me the benefits that come from hard training. And it also gave me the survival skills to know how to evade, how to block, and how to counter life's challenges. Unfortunately, when I was 18, my dad died of cancer. He taught me a lot of good things when I was a child, like how to ride a bike and how to swim. But in my teens, we didn't really have a lot of contact. So around this time, I was really trying to figure out, how the hell do you be a man? And I was trying to seek identity in the world around me. So in white environments, people always saw me as black or the other. In mixed environments, people saw me as mixed or black. And in black environments, people saw me as black or sometimes not black enough. So in a world that's been plagued by white supremacy, often a lot of the opportunities that have been accessible to us as someone who has been classified as black have been limited. But the things that have been easily to access are a lot of the stereotypes that can be seen in popular culture and mainstream media. Being black is seen as cool. A black man is seen as bad, dangerous, sexy, athletic and strong, dangerous. We weren't seen as book smart, but we were seen as streetwise and gangster. So I quickly tried to aspire to many of these roles and found that they only really connected to part of my character. And in their totality, they kind of limited my full potential. And I got to a stage where I was like, I realized I just lacked knowledge. I lacked knowledge of my ancestors, and I lacked an understanding of how the world had come to be what it is today. So I started a personal quest. A quest to find new ways of understanding what it was to be black, but in truth, to understand what it was to be human in the 21st century. At this stage, all I knew about black history was what I'd seen in the American TV show Roots. And I discovered, I knew that those of us of African descent had been enslaved in our recent history. But as I began to do research, I quickly discovered a tapestry that told a story of resistance, ingenuity, and great African civilizations that had existed in Africa for thousands of years before European development. So with this new knowledge, life started to become more of an adventure, an uncovering and a discovering of self and the world. Muay Thai had given me the strength and the courage to be prepared to go into the unknown and see what I could discover for myself. I'm truly honored and blessed and grateful to say today I've been to 35 countries around the world, and I've made films about ancient Africa's golden times and looked at civilizations along the Nile that went on to influence the Greeks and the Romans, and other films on social and political histories and activism. I've learned many things on my journeys, and most importantly, I now see myself more as a spiritual being having a human experience. Today, I'm just going to share with you one story and one journey, and that was my very first journey to Africa. I was 24, and a friend of mine invited me to come and stay with him and his family in the beautiful West African country of Sierra Leone. Now, I looked up the history online, and I discovered that it had been set up by the British and freed African Americans who had fought for Britain during the American War of Independence. And I thought, wow, I didn't know that anyone enslaved in America had ever returned to Africa. I thought this would be an interesting story to share with other people. So I asked another friend of mine. I had no idea about making films. Like, what do I need to do to make a documentary? And he gave me a long list that started with research. So I spent 3 months in the British National Archives, reading ship's logs and Admiralty reports, and really learning about Britain's history and Britain's involvement in West Africa and Sierra Leone. And then I put a small team together, and we traveled to Sierra Leone. It's me at 24. So I'd heard many stories about the dark and scary continent of Africa. But I was also aware of the violence that had happened in Sierra Leone during their civil war. But as I arrived, I was blown away by the hospitality and the friendliness of the people and the beauty of the natural landscape. One of the first experiences that really got me thinking about myself a little bit different is as I walked down one of the busy streets in Freetown, the capital, young guys called out to me, "Hey, Iboto, Iboto." And I was like, "Yeah, what's up? How you doing?" And they were like, "Hey, hey." I said, "What does Iboto mean?" And the guy said, "It means white man." I said, "What?" I was shocked. And I looked at myself, I said, "But I'm brown, and you're brown." And he just looked at me and laughed. But it really got me thinking, maybe skin color doesn't actually define race. So I started to do a bit more research. And I discovered that the concept of race was only created in Europe in the 18th century. And it wasn't at all a scientific term. As we know now, Africa is the foundation of humanity, and cultures thrived there for a long period of time. And then as these Africans started to spread out around the world into Europe and Asia and the Americas, people only changed in their look due to environment, food, and the intermixing of different genes. And this kind of discovery started to show me our interconnection a lot more. But my experience in Sierra Leone of being called white for the first time, it really highlighted for me the importance of how we should all know our personal story, because others will always classify us by their own cultural standards, unless we tell them different. So I thought, you know what, I'm in Africa. I'm going to finally hear the truth about African history. So I went to visit Bunce Island, a once thriving British slave fortress. An old illiterate man who had been taught orally by an American anthropologist took me on a tour, and he told me a strange story about savage Africans killing each other until these kind-hearted Americans arrived on the shore and offered them work back in America. My heart sunk as I heard his story, because this is nothing of what I had discovered in the National Archives or I'd read in books. But it struck me that even in Africa, African history had been distorted. As I later continued to travel across Sierra Leone, I interviewed historians and elders in different communities, and I learned about rich and diverse peoples that lived in this region, who in the past had been famous for their knowledge in agriculture and fishing, and also their ability to do arts and crafts, but amazingly also to smelt metal. And this new knowledge gave me an added sense of dignity to know that my West African ancestors hadn't only been taken for their strength and labor, but also for their knowledge and skill. I learned many things on my journey in Sierra Leone, but one time that really stands out strong in my memory is a time that I spent with a coastal people called the Sherbro. Now their village was in a beautiful location. It had lush, green and tropical mountains in the background and a fresh water river that ran down to the ocean. The village itself was materially poor. They were not a wealthy people, but they were rich in social interaction, human kindness, and had a great care for one another. They tended to operate and live their culture based on the rising and the fall of the sea and the changing of the seasons. And after a while, having no watch and no phone, I started to learn how to tell the time by where the sun was in the sky or where the moon was. And I started to really feel a sense of belonging in my connection to nature and the natural world. Most days the men would get up really early and go fishing. When they returned, the women would dry and sell the fish. And in their communities, both the men and women could lead depending on their knowledge and skill. They would both cook at different times, but they had defining roles that was linked to womanhood and manhood. I saw elders not only feeding their children freshly caught fish, but also teaching them how to fish and continue their legacy. When the children got to teenagers, they would go through something that was called rites of passage. And this would really initiate them into the responsibilities of adults. And it would integrate them into their communities. And this was something I really felt I'd lacked growing up in England. In the UK, the main things that define us going from children to adults is the fact that we can vote, or we can drink or smoke or have sex or go to a club. We have education systems, but nothing that really teaches us or helps prepare us for the responsibilities that we're going to have to take on as adults as part of a community. There's a great African saying that says if the young are not initiated into the tribe, that when they get older, they'll burn down the village just to feel its warmth. My time in Sierra Leone taught me many things. Most importantly, it gave me new examples of manhood. It allowed me to connect more with the natural world, and it showed me some of the positive contributions that Africans have made to the modern world. knowing now that Africa is the cradle of humanity, culture, and civilization, this journey really helped me to connect more with our African roots. Today, I've obviously traveled much more. I made my first documentary after this journey called The Lion Mountains, a journey through Sierra Leone's history. And it became a catalyst for me to go on many other journeys around the world. And I've now spent a lot of time with different cultures. And I find that we have more in common than we do differences. We all have the same basic needs for survival like food, clothing, water, and shelter. Also the emotional needs of love, connection, growth, and having meaning and purpose in our lives. I would often wonder, as I returned to the UK, what was it that was different about these small communities and us living in the so-called modern world? But I later come to understand that their way of life was much more about being connected to their heart. They had a heartical connection to themselves, to one another, and to the natural world. The Honorable Marcus Garvey once said, "A people without knowledge of their origin, their past, and their culture is like a tree without roots." And my travels have taught me that today the world is, and humanity is like a massive and mighty tree with many branches. And I believe it's important for all of us to know our connection to one another. For the more the world was able to see itself like a global village, then the more likely we could be to preserve and to protect our future. Thank you very much.